Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm going to give it a couple minutes here so that y'all can get logged on. But we'd love to know who's watching. Drop your location, name, say hi in the chat, and we'll definitely answer questions. This is going to be super casual today. We have our team with us from Chatterkick that are our wonderful ad strategists. And so we're just going to give you a little insight into some of the conversations that we are having internally about how Meta is changing and how their systems are changing. And it's something as CMOs and leaders, we want to give you the tools so you can have better conversations with your team, as well as really understand some of the options and capabilities of how to reach your audience in 2026. So before we jump in, I want my team, my awesome team, to get a chance to introduce themselves a little bit, and then we'll just jump into some Q&A. So go ahead, team.
All right, well, I'll kick it off. My name is Mariah Black Overholt, and I have been at Chatterkick for over 6 years now, and I am an analytics lead basically, and have been in the ad strategist role as well. So basically what I do day to day is look at the data and help us, kind of make decisions based on that data and drive the strategy. I've been here since before iOS 14, back in the day when you could do all kinds of targeting. And I've been here obviously since iOS 14 when it was very limited and on what you could do. And now kind of coming into this age of Andromeda, it feels like a return to the 60s and kind of like that Mad Men style marketing where it was much more focused on the broader message and the brand. And I can't say that I don't actually hate that. So I'm excited to talk about this today because I think it's actually a return to more of a like purer form of true marketing and like what the message matters more than the targeting necessarily. So I'm excited to be here and talk through everything, and I'll pass it off to Austin.
Thanks, Mariah. I'm one of the other ad strategists here at Chatterkick, and we spend a lot of time looking at numbers. We spend a lot of time looking at our clients' campaigns, and when there are big shifts, it does make us nervous. So digging into Andromeda, digging into these big changes, it's been really helpful to just see how our strategies continue to work, how we can adjust those. And the things that we have found have been really validating and also encouraging. There's a lot of doom and gloom around this subject, but there doesn't really have to be. It's just another adjustment, and it might, in the long term, be a lot more beneficial to your brand. So that's what I'll say with my introduction.
All right, and I'm Aileen Farrow. I am also an ad strat at Chatterkick. I worked for Chatterkick for 4 years now, so also in the loop with all of these new optimizations and a way of strategizing our client campaigns. Also always looking forward to keeping our team and our clients updated with everything that's needed for their campaigns.
Awesome. Well, thank you, team. And we're just going to kind of popcorn around a couple of topics and conversations today. But before we do, I do want to kind of just start out by giving the marketing leaders in this webinar just an idea of what we're seeing happening and where the companies that are winning are focusing, as well as those that are just getting a little bit left behind in 2026. So the first thing, I was at a meeting the other day, and it was a board that I'm on, and we were talking about marketing and, how the plan is going to look for 2026. And I think what I realized in that conversation was just how obvious it was that we have to use a new playbook. And when you have newness and change, it really feels uncomfortable for both the execution team as well as leaders, because your attribution has to change, the mindset has to change, and the things that we thought we knew were true may need to be challenged. I think one of the biggest risks leaders have right now, especially if you're managing marketing teams, is if you think you know something and you're not open to being challenged on that approach. I see this all the time with Meta ads when I'm looking at our ad accounts and performance, things look different. There's different modules. There's, the tools themselves operate in a totally different way in terms of how they find the audience. And so I think it's super important to be open, to be curious, to try and test new things, because if you're just standing still, or if you're repurposing and recycling the way that you've done things in the past, I think that is one of the biggest risks that's out there, because there is no one standard. I mean, we run a lot of ads, and we have to constantly be asking ourselves, is there a better way? Is there a different way? Should we try something totally even against what Meta is recommending, because they recommend the things that they want you to do. And sometimes that's not always the right way to actually get results. So before we kind of go into some of the more technical things, I want to let Eileen talk a little bit about Andromeda, which is what we're kind of focusing on today. It sounds like some mystical beast in my world, but it really is the way that Facebook is using technology and learnings to display and serve your ads. So Eileen, tell me straightforward, no jargon, what is Andromeda?
All right. I feel like if we had to describe kind of like Andromeda, it would be Meta saying, let me drive kind of thing and let me do the thing. So I do feel like for years, we've been kind of like in that driver's seat where we wanted to take control of everything, audiences, designs, and everything. And right now, and like those little pieces and trying to put interests and trying to put demographics and everything where we would try to find those specific personas for a client. I'm not saying that we don't want to do that anymore, because of course we do, and we still have those personas for our clients as well. But now Meta is bringing Andromeda so that Andromeda could actually drive that, and we can sit in the companion seat and start feeding Meta with what's actually needed. So Andromeda is bringing kind of like a shift and a change in the dynamic of how we want to manage those campaigns and how we want to set up those campaigns as well. As you were mentioning, Beth, before, sometimes Meta, we have to go against what Meta tells us mostly, because one strategy wouldn't fit all, and we do work as a team with our customers as well, so that we can generate those strategies that would fit what they're needing. So now what Andromeda is doing, and where the heavy lifting is that they would decide who sees your ad and how the budget is being shifted. And it's not like once a day, it's constantly with everything that we provide to the platform. So I do feel like one of the things that changed were kind of like this consolidation of things. So we are seeing less campaigns and less structure, but also more creatives and more, I would say, not just creatives, but more brand alignment when it comes to that communication. We were talking with the ad strats yesterday, and it's not a matter of like, all right, let's just do something generic and test it and have it run so that we can see what's working and what's not. It's actually listening to the community that we're trying to build, finding their problems, seeing those pain points, and actually turning them into communications and turning them into ads, and seeing which ones resonate best with that audience that we're trying to target. So I feel like it's being able to provide Meta that those creatives, have that variety. We're not talking about one or two ads anymore. We're talking about nice 10 ads that we want to be having. And we're also talking about 10 different ads with 10 different communications, not just let me change this blue to green and just call it a new ad. It's testing different creatives, but then letting Meta learn and run and find those users where they're at. So yeah, it's not like making audience thinner, but feeding the system with what it wants.
I think what we're seeing with this is that like where before the learning period was just something that you kind of like suffered through, I think the learning period is incredibly important in Andromeda. And that's where the variety is kind of coming through, because basically what it's done is it's taken, we used to be so focused so heavily on the audience controls and the targeting. And basically we're pulling back to a much broader audience that allows the inventory to be shown to more people. Basically Meta's saying, I actually know your audience better than you do. I think that you should open this up to a much broader range of people, because there are people outside of what you would say in that targeting that probably need to hear your message. But on the flip side, I need you to tell me what your message is specifically for people and not be very generic about it. It needs to be very, very angled and have strong hooks. And so instead of focusing so heavily on the audience building, and I feel like that for years was very much where people lived, was entirely in the ad set. That was where the majority of the optimization happened. And we're really seeing that pulled back to the ad level, where you have to get better at actually crafting the messaging and crafting unique angles for people, because that's where that's going to change and where that's going to happen now. And having those varieties in there then allows Meta to say, okay, I tried this version with these people and it didn't work over here, but let me try it with these people and it might work over there. And then you start to see where this variety is making sense. But then you also start to see where this learning period actually makes more sense too, where, those years and those days of where you could turn off an ad because it wasn't working after 24 hours doesn't really apply so much anymore, because maybe they just haven't found that audience yet. There's millions and millions of ad inventory that Meta has to go through very, very quickly to get to the right user. And so you want to let those creatives kind of work and not be so rushed necessarily to make quick judgments, which I think a lot of performance marketers that have large budgets are very used to doing.
Yeah. And I think just to remind all of our leaders, if you are not familiar with Meta ads as a system within the Meta, or most people still call them Facebook ads, in the manager, you will have a campaign level, which sets your objective. You will have an ad set level, which typically holds the audience. And then you have your ads that kind of are the little, the children underneath. And so one thing to really talk to your team about is like, let's review our structures that we've used in the past. Do they still hold true today? Do we have enough creative variations, and are they sharp enough? Is that fair, team? Is that what you would hope
Yes.
those conversations would look like?
Yeah, I think
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think creative is going to be the most important thing. I've seen a lot of chatter around frustration and worry about being able to put out enough of these unique pieces that, like Aileen was saying, like it can't just be like a change in the font style or even the image. Like I know it used to be like, oh, this person's looking at the camera versus this person's like looking over here. Let's run them A/B against each other and see which one works. And that just that Meta still considers that basically the same ad at this point. You haven't created enough variation. It's not a different concept. And so I think we've seen people, again, starting to get a little panicked where they're like, well, how do I make, the number of creatives that I need, where, I think it depends on your budget. You don't want to have 100 ads in like a $500 campaign, or they'll never get enough budget to test out of that. But like, I would say, if you're spending probably less than $10,000 a month, you could run between 10 and 20 ads in a campaign and you'd be fine. So that doesn't mean that you have to make 10 completely new or 20 completely new ads every single month. What we're trying to see here is like 4 to 5 concepts that have those unique hooks that might be slightly different than what it is that you're already putting in there. And one of the things that we suggest is actually testing your content in the feed. You can either pull from your organic content that you're already putting out, that ideally you have, worked through and it has a place in the funnel and it's not just posting for posting's sake, but is actually a valuable piece of content that speaks to your ICP directly. And so you can take those high performers and you can actually put them into your lower level campaigns as well. That's definitely something that you can and should do. You can even take the post IDs that already have that social proofing on them. So you don't even have to start necessarily from scratch. And that's just one really easy way I think that people can get that variety without having to have, this huge labor intensive creative work.
Yeah. And I think the creativity in that really comes if you have an organic post that maybe isn't direct response related, but you need it to be, like the call to action is more inspirational and not direct. And that's where like your team can lean in on that. Like ask your creative team, like, how can we leverage this same success to make it performance or to make it have a stronger CTA? There's probably a lot of nuance in that doesn't require a total reinvention of, what's working. Can you talk a little bit, Mariah, about just the connection between organic and paid in terms of how well your paid performs? Because I see a lot of brands really silo those two teams, which is fine. They have an ad agency running their performance meta campaigns. Maybe they're doing other ads. And then they also have their organic teams. But they're not really separate channels in Meta's world. So Mariah, talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I think, when we look at like performance marketing versus like organic marketing, we live, like Beth mentioned, like they tend to live fairly separately. And I kind of alluded to earlier, like your content shouldn't just be posted for content's sake. Like it should really work together with your paid content and with your organic. At Chatterkick, we tend to believe that they can live together in synchrony. And like I mentioned, like we pull content from our feeds into our lower level campaigns, and the messaging all has to work well together. But from a meta perspective, there's actually a cost benefit and kind of a tax that's kind of applied to content that doesn't match. So if you have a lot of organic content that is not getting even decent engagement by organic standards, and you're also running a ton of dollars in the paid side with content that doesn't match up with what you're posting on the organic side, there is a disconnect and you will actually be taxed for that. Now it's not going to say, like, it's not going to show up in ads managers like this, like engagement tax, but basically what's going to happen is you are going to pay more for your auctions that you're seeing. So your cost per clicks are going to increase, your CPMs are going to increase. In theory, if you're running a lead campaign, like those are going to be probably insanely expensive. And that's because you haven't connected your brand with your paid side. And that's really what Meta wants to see. It wants to see that proof that people actually connect with your brand already, or it's not going to give you those efficient ads to start with. And so I think in the past, again, it was very easy to say like, okay, let me just start this ad account and I basically don't have to pay attention to what I'm using on my page. But I think now that has shifted a lot. We see trust be more of an important signal with people that, if they don't trust the brand that's being shown on the page, they're not going to trust the ads either. And we know that all kind of plays together. So if that's something that you're not currently doing, like you don't have a strong content strategy for your feeds, and that means both Facebook and Instagram, because Instagram plays into this as well. We're not just talking about Facebook. That's something that you really should take a strong look at, or be okay with spending more to get those clicks to build that trust, because Meta then has to do extra work to try to get you in front of the people that you haven't been in front of before.
Yeah, that's a good point. And speaking of trust, because I think it is so important, like most leaders are looking at how they can continue to maintain their trust, but also build some form of streamlined workflows, maybe leverage AI. Austin, tell me about this. Like, what do you think is going to be the difference between those companies that use AI in the right way and those that maybe just use it to get things done?
Yeah. So I was watching in the past week this report from Motion. They do analytics for content. And it was really interesting to see that of the formats that they had analyzed, over 400,000 ads, the top 8 formats that they were analyzing, or rather the top 8 performers, 6 out of 8 of those were very, very human focused. So it's not stated in that guide or that report, but one of the things that I pulled from that is just how much users in the feeds don't want to see things that are like AI, right? They want to see humans in the content. So if your AI is showing through on the front end where people can see it, that is an issue. So talking about, helping everything behind the scenes, there are so many areas where you can streamline processes. For example, like taking huge amounts of data, right? I would take hours and hours and hours pouring through lines in a spreadsheet, whereas the AI can analyze that and spit out in just a few seconds, like main themes, totals of how many people did a specific thing, So like if you can shorten those analytical periods and get to your main focuses more quickly, ideate more quickly, you're going to be able to test more of this content that Mariah is talking about and that Eileen is talking about in the feeds to help to build out your messaging and get your Andromeda, algorithm to do the things that it's programmed to do. Focus in on the objectives that you're trying to reach. And again, just with as little of that AI in the content that people are viewing as possible.
Yeah, I think what people don't want is they don't want to be duped, right? So like we were having this conversation the other day is like, let's take animation, right? Like people understand if they watch a cartoon or an animated film that they're not looking at a real human, right? It's a cartoon. And, we've had not real characters for a very long time. But I think where we see the pushback is the feeling of like exactly what you said, Austin, is like, is AI showing? Is it showing up in a way that feels deceitful, or this really isn't a picture of something and you're pretending like it is? That's when the brands are getting called out. And honestly, that's where I think that trust is eroding because it's obvious. Right?
Yeah, well, and we see it all the time in the comments. We'll have a client who's posting images of their food. We'll put some, graphic text over it. And in the comment section, someone will say something that's like, hey, not trying to point fingers, but is this AI? And it's like, no, that's actually just a pork burger. It's not beef. So it's supposed to be that color. But, looking at a lot of the data, over half of the people on social media are skeptical right now. Only about 45% of users on social feel confident they can spot AI. So that just means like trust is really important. That skeptical mindset that people are approaching the content with is really important to pay attention to, because you don't want to be viewed as a brand that is trying to dupe people or being inauthentic. They want to know like what's real. And going back to some of those formats, testimonials, those were huge in the ads. Demos showing the actual product in use by a real human, those were like within the top 2 formats that were analyzed. You have behind the scenes, tutorials, unboxings, like incorporating these types of things into your content in that, 10 to 15 ad group that Andromeda needs to work with. You can see a lot of success, and it's not going to be the same with every client. It's not going to be the same in every account with every audience, but just getting those in there can really help you to get traction and get, converting with your ads. So.
Yeah. And I think even in B2B, that works, like you can use those same concepts and yes, you're not unboxing a product, but you're giving that like what's in it mindset, like mentality, right? Like there's suspense and then an outcome of some sort. And that could be, unlocking a new product launch or a new service line, or even just like reimagining something that you're currently doing in a new way. That's surprising and interesting.
And then Austin, can you speak a little bit about like the pendulum shift? You mentioned like people being distrustful of content So like shift that pendulum over from like perfection in ads where we had these very kind of shiny, bright, everything's perfect and beautiful. People don't trust that as much anymore. So have we seen like a shift back over to like maybe a little bit of imperfection is showing where it's like, okay, I know that that's real.
Absolutely. And it's funny because you can game it with your AI content creation, right? But people are looking for authenticity. And so with a perfect image, more people these days, over half are skeptical of the things that they're seeing. So they're looking for clues that the content they're viewing is from a real human. They don't want to be scammed. As a marketer, that's a little bit painful because we try to create things so perfectly. We want them to present so well. And so to have something like that in a post that goes out, historically, that's felt like a major, major error. But now it's almost part of some people's strategies, especially with things, like executive social, executives who are posting content may be using less caps at the beginning of their sentences, for example, or like having 2 periods at the end of a sentence versus just the one with a space, little imperfections or human touches like that have kind of been rolled into the strategy.
Yeah. I feel like I've even seen a lot.
Sorry, I was going to say, just seeing that in performance too, like sometimes we even work on those like super perfect ads because we love aesthetic things and we just want to make them work. But then we see some ads that are not as clean, just performing. And that's just something that we are constantly seeing. And also how users are also wanting that human connection when it comes to like a brand answering or just seeing that a brand is using their picture as UGC, just generating that community sense that's not just like, well, I'm going to see if this product actually looks like what they're showing to me, and more kind of like, look, this person's actually showing how it looks, so I trust them.
Eileen, can you talk a little bit for like, let's say B2B brands? Obviously, they only sell to a certain segment, so there is some targeting that needs to happen. But with Andromeda and like the basically movement away from these super granular audiences, what are people doing? Like, how are our businesses or accounts balancing both the targeting as well as the change in Andromeda?
So first of all, we're also using all of the information that we're getting from the machines in our favor as well by analyzing who we're able to target. And even though we're not like super granulating our audiences, we're also getting all of the reports back from the audiences and platforms that we actually can read and see. So analyzing that and also starting to think, as Mariah was mentioning, on those concepts specifically that would resonate with those specific targets. And of course, we also, for those B2B brands, we do like to target specific companies or job positions, if we will. We want to continue to do a little bit of that, but I do feel like the main shift is just thinking it from the creative now. I feel like, as you were mentioning, Beth, it was kind of like before we would think as campaigns of like, all right, objective, audience, creative. And now it might be even more kind of like, all right, creative, audience, and then objective. Kind of like now the creative takes the lead because it's, all right, what do you want to communicate? What's the issue here? What is your service? What are you bringing? And then based on that, we're thinking, who do we want to see the target and to see the ad? And then of course we always kind of know the objective for the campaign.
Right.
But I feel like that's how we're tackling it for B2B and mostly now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
The important thing to remember too is that like this is Meta only. We've always been a little bit more limited on our B2B targeting on Meta,
Yeah.
so it's always been a little bit more wide open. It's not to say that you still can't do that, and custom audiences still work really well. Lookalikes still work really well, so those are really good tools, I think, for Meta specifically. But if you're mostly targeting on LinkedIn, you can still get very, very granular, and you still should get very, very granular.
Yeah, I did
I'm-
mix a little bit in on my answer too.
Yeah, well, and I'm hopeful that on Meta, because recruitment ads have been really difficult as far as targeting goes. They really cut out, like, as in gut, the targeting you're allowed to use for that ad category. But with Andromeda, as it is assessing each user and trying to determine the user's intent, it's using all this data to determine what does this person want to do. I'm hopeful that with recruitment campaigns, it's going to be better at showing recruitment ads to the people who would be looking for that without us having the access to do it ourselves in the targeting.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point. What do you think, like, we've been talking a lot about this Andromeda with Meta. What do you think marketing teams need to make sure that their leaders know about these changes? Like, what would be your main, like, you need to make sure your boss knows this moment? Each of you, I'd love to hear your perspective. Eileen, you go first.
I say that AI can't, like, learning how to place AI and knowing where to place humans. Because if you are being tactical with that, I feel like you could get a lot of advantage. But if you don't, you could totally miss out with your brand. So knowing where to put people, knowing where to use AI as a resource, and taking advantage of everything that you can get out of it.
Awesome. Love that. Mariah?
All right. The one thing we really haven't talked about that much yet is how this affects your reporting. And obviously that's a huge deal. Not directly related to Andromeda, but I think we've also seen a major shift in the last few years as far as attribution goes. And, again, for a few years before IDFA and iOS 14, it was very easy to get a lot of first-person data really easily and to really get more granular with the results. And you could see specific conversion events happening from very specific posts. And it has become a lot more difficult to get a lot of that kind of data. And so I think one of the biggest things, I kind of spoke about it a little bit with kind of the learnings, but one of the biggest things to take away from Andromeda and just the ecosystem of where we are with attribution right now is that tracking, those specific exact linear journeys from single ad clicks to closed deals is really no longer realistic. You're going to have everything from, you start on social, maybe you start on social, and then you go to a Google search, and then maybe you see a video back on social, and then maybe you talk to somebody in your network about this company that you heard about, and then maybe you come back to the website because you remember the website, and then you forget about it for 4 weeks, and then you're like, oh, I saw their post again on social, and all of a sudden we've got so many touch points, and the more complicated the business and the more complicated the buyer journey is, the longer that those get. And obviously, like, we can no longer say, like, this is the post that caused that conversion, like, because it may have happened 5 or 6 touch points ago. And I think Andromeda actually really kind of works in kind of like a broader awareness favor, because that is, that's the concept, is like you are going to see multiple ads in multiple, styles from these campaigns, ideally. And so just trying to break away from this idea that every single piece of content has to, like, be a sales driver is so important. I think you're going to see folks that continue to, like, try to react to all the noisy data. It's like, again, it's that, like, I'm trying to change things after 24 hours. You're going to keep that system in learning. It's never going to stabilize. You just have to stop treating Meta like a day trader. Like, we are not running the stock market here. Like, sometimes it just has to do its job, let it work. That's not to say that, like, if you see an ad that's obviously wrong for the audience that you're using, or there's very obvious issues with it, turn that off, get that out of there. That's just low quality to begin with. But that's part of the quality project. Like, as you're building this, is like making sure that the pieces you're putting in make sense. But turning those off after a few hours is insane at this point. And so what leaders really should be doing is asking the question, is our overall marketing investment driving revenue over a 90-day window? You have, those cycles with Andromeda. You're going to see cycles of consideration, and then you're going to see cycles of awareness, and you're going to see cycles of conversion. And like I said, those paths are going to be longer on some brands. And so just trying to be realistic about that. And looking at things like directional metrics like brand search and lift, and that your inbound sales lead quality, any sales cycle changes you're seeing, mixing that with the engagement that you're seeing on social. And I think in 2026, that engagement itself is a whole nother conversation we could be having. But I think even some of those metrics have shifted a little bit. We're looking at more things like view through rates, dwell time, longer video views, that, where we're seeing people stop and pause as opposed to just direct impressions, I think is incredibly important. So I think keeping it a little bit more holistic, a little bit more of an overview, as opposed to, okay, this specific post did this or didn't do that, is really where we're going to see the winners come out of this shift.
Yeah, and just to build on that quick before we jump over to you, Austin, I do think that the question they need to be having in their meetings from leaders in the execution teams or agencies is, what is possible and reliable for measurement? Mm-hmm. Because as humans, our behavior is so different than sometimes as marketers we want it to be. I mean, I see stuff on social all the time. I open the tab in a new browser and I just save the tab. I know I'm going to go back to it, but the pixel's probably expired at that point. No one's getting attribution. And it's just like the way I save it as a human. But that's not that uncommon for people to like bookmark things or, file it in their head or write it down. And you're never going to see that in terms of that path. And so I think it's just a matter of pairing human behavior with real attribution that is measurable and trying to do as best as you can for testing and learning purposes.
Yeah, we've actually seen, this is a little bit of a hot button phrase. I got in a client meeting the other day. They're like, can you not say that? Like, it sounds really weird when you say dark social. Dark social is a real thing. It is not related to the dark web at all. So don't try to conflate the two. But basically what that means is that like we're taking interactions off of any sort of measurable attribution, like Beth was saying. So like, bookmarks make sense, but also like if you have somebody in the comments that says, hey, I shared this with a coworker, you can't trace that share that they had, but we know that something did happen there. Or if you text somebody, share it in real life. Those are all measurable pieces or non-measurable pieces of real life human interaction and connection with your brand that there is zero way that you are ever going to be able to see. And so recognizing that those are valuable, but you can't see them is just part of where you're going to have to build that into your reporting process and say, like, we can assume that a portion of this happened because of that. And here's where we can maybe be a little bit make some assumptions about maybe what percentage that was based off of, a lift in organic traffic after this happened, or, like kind of that brand recall lift, or those are kind of the metrics that we're looking at to see lifts there.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, Austin, you're in a meeting with CMOs and their teams. What do you hope that they're talking about?
I think there's been a big kind of thought as AI is rolled out that like you can get rid of, half the people on your team because you can just have AI do it. And I think that was more pronounced maybe a couple of years ago. People were thinking, I can just have an intern come in, we'll give them some AI tools. We've got a copywriter built into ChatGPT, etc. But we've really seen the importance of guardrails come up. Right. You need to have people who know what you're trying to accomplish, who know what the capabilities are of the advertising platforms, who understand what, engagements mean on social and can read that data, and then use the AI to interpret all of that to, continue working toward your business goals. I think one of the things that is a challenge with a lot of AI is consistency from day to day. If you input the same prompt into the AI, you're going to get different outcomes, right? It's going to give you different voices even. So if you're relying on ChatGPT to be your copywriter, for example, you're going to need to give it very specific instructions for what output you want, what things you're trying to accomplish in the words that you're displaying in your ads. Because if you just go with whatever's in ChatGPT that day, that's going to be detrimental to the brand you're trying to build, the consistency that you want people to experience and know you for. And it's going to be not great for long-term brand building.
And I think it's like we've tested some of these tools. One of the tests we did turned one of the brands into a fruit, which I thought was interesting. It is not a fruit brand. It's a home service brand, but there are so many like icks still with some of these automated tools. And so I think what I hear you say, Austin, is where does the human live in these processes that we currently have? What isn't as critical for humans to start or brainstorm? And then like you said, where do we need those guardrails? I think those conversations need to be held on a regular basis because it's changing so fast.
Absolutely. I think AI is fantastic at giving you a baseline. And then you take your human input, your human understanding to connect it with other humans. If you are just having AI do everything, people are going to feel that. And so at the end of the day, these AI tools are really fantastic at accelerating your human abilities, at shortening some of those things like we discussed earlier that take a lot of time to analyze. You can get an analysis pretty quickly, but if you're trying to get audiences to do a specific thing, and you're just putting a bunch of ads into an ad set and letting Andromeda do what it does, right now, AI in that system really wants to show people videos. Well, if that doesn't align with your business goals or like the things that you want people to be doing in the feeds, then you're kind of stuck if you're just putting them all into that one system, showing people video. So like, you need to know where to push back. You need a team that knows where to push back on things like this. If you need people to be engaging with static images, for example, and not have all your budget just flow to those videos, you need someone with the confidence to say, we're going to start another ad set that's going to push this other type of content so that you can get conversations started, or you can get more specific engagements that are going to start this mental process in people's minds of like, your brand is fun, or your brand does this thing. The AI is great, but all of these processes still need to be very much human-led.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up here and take some questions. I see we have one question. The question is, I'm going to toss this over to you, Mariah. So not necessarily specific to Andromeda, but there's been a big jump in bot comments, right? Spam, so much spam on social. How do we have confidence that their engagements are real, especially for campaigns that are not focused on sales or leads?
So I think that this is a very human problem. And it comes back to a very human solution to start with. And that is that, like, you probably need to be making sure that you are watching your comments that are coming in every day and having those moderation conversations in your comment boxes. It is basically impossible to prevent that kind of spam. There are some things that you can do kind of on the Meta backside in Business Suite that allow for some filtering of specific keywords and that sort of thing. But as we have seen, I think even just in the last few months, a lot of these spam comments have gotten a lot more sophisticated. They do sound a lot more like people. And so having your guard up a little bit as to, this is something you're not going to want to let AI handle, is right. Basically I think what we're saying. Having your guard up, does it feel fishy? If it feels like it's totally off topic, like if it feels like it's a real comment, but it's off topic to what it is that you're saying in your content, there's a pretty good chance that it's spam. And like I said, there's not a lot of ways that you can really prevent a lot of this, but what you can do is just hide it, block those folks and move on. Make sure that you're getting it out of there when it comes to your reporting, and that you're only really reporting on the interactions that are real. Trying to make sure that for as much as you can, like, you don't have blocks of spam on your content that people are seeing, because that is a sign that you're not watching your content and you're not kind of living in your house and taking care of your house. Is basically, you know, that's your online space. And so it's less of I think, an issue of like, the spam comments are going to negatively impact kind of your overall engagement score. And it's more of just like making sure that you're cleaning things up, and that the engagements that you are getting that are real are getting real human responses, and that you're interacting with those appropriately, because those are the things that you can control. Spam comments are not something that we have a ton of control over.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate all the ad strats for joining us today. If there is any extra comments, or if anybody has some follow-up, we are easy to find and reach out to. Our website is chatterkick.com, and you can find our contact form or our emails on LinkedIn, as well as on our website. So Eileen, Mariah, Austin, thank you so much. Hope everybody in the audience learned a little something about Andromeda, AI, attribution, and all things meta ads. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.